So first, early impressions of West Virginia's new head coach, Neal Brown, and what is it about him that you think would lead to success at West Virginia?
He's one of the smartest guys in college football. Anybody who spent much time around Neal knows he's brilliant. And I think you see a guy who has a real offensive pedigree, yet go back a couple years when he's at Troy and they play LSU in Baton Rouge. You know, he's an air raid guy by pedigree, but the way they beat them was physical football. And I think if I was a West Virginia fan, I'd be excited about stuff like that because he's really good at developing players, and whether it's toughness, I mean, he's kind of the whole package. The only probably perceived negative is he looks really young. And I think for people who forget, Troy had really backslidden. When he went in there and he really elevated the program, I thought he did a terrific job. I think it's fortunate for them. He could have been at Texas Tech. They could have hired him. K-State. I mean, it just kind of worked out that way. I mean, he should be at a Power 5 job, and I think West Virginia is lucky to have him.
Do you see that type of turnaround here at West Virginia, just really a few seasons before he goes and takes this program to the top?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year is going to be a rough year because I think Dana Holgorsen knew it was probably the window was time to go. Not only do you lose Will Greer, you lose Yannick Adjust, you lose a bunch of really good skill guys and their best player on defense. You know, I think they were going to go from 8 or 9 wins to maybe 5 or 6, maybe not even that many. So in that regard, I think the timing, it's going to be, you better be patient, I think, for the first couple of years. I think they could be looking at them, they have a few players, but I think they're probably a fringe bowl team for maybe this year and maybe even next year.
Losing those players and some unknowns, of course, this season as well, like you said, picked to finish 8th in the preseason poll. You feel that's an accurate representation?
I do. I look at it and I think Texas and OU, as probably a lot of people expect, are the top 2 teams. And then I think there's a next tier where I think Iowa State, I would put TCU, Baylor, which is relevant for a reason I'll get to in a second, and then I put Oklahoma State. And then after that, Texas Tech is rebuilding. Certainly West Virginia, I think, is reloading and rebuilding. And I would also say, way down the list is Kansas because, I mean, I think they're just really, really far, far away talent-wise. But the Baylor thing is interesting because it didn't take Matt Rule that long, to go from a team that was a one-win team to really respectable and a team that is physical and tough. And I think you'll see Neal do that in a relatively short time at West Virginia.
Austin Kendall transferring in, a quarterback there at West Virginia. What have you seen? Have you seen much from him in his time at Oklahoma? Get a chance to look at the spring game. How do you think he could be a good fit if he does end up as West Virginia's starter?
Just a little bit at the OU practices I went to when we did OU games. He looks like he's pretty talented. I think he wouldn't have been at OU with Lincoln Riley if he wasn't talented. And I think what's going to be challenging a little bit is they have good running backs, but I think the bar is so high right now for West Virginia fans, and it's great that it's high, but you went from Geno Smith and everything he did, and then you had one good quarterback and prolific after another, and you get to Will Greer, who put up ridiculous numbers. I just think people are going to expect, sky high, and I'm not sure that you're going to get that in year one for a lot of people and a system where they're just learning it on the fly.
Haven't named a starter yet between Jack Allison and Austin Kendall, Trey Lowe thrown in there as well. Do you see Austin emerging as the starter? Is that who you expect to start for West Virginia here in the next month?
I do. I would expect him. I'd be surprised if Jack Allison ended up taking over the job. I think Austin probably is a guy who gives them maybe a little more in the pass game and probably is somebody that I think they look at and say, okay, potentially we can do more with him and he can take us further. So I would expect him to be the guy, but I don't think any head coach wants to just anoint a guy because you want to build your program on competition and you want to let that play out as much as you can.
So you say could maybe do a little more with Austin Kendall. What do you think his skill set is? Just expand on that a little.
I think he's a guy when you look at, he has some NFL tools potentially. I mean, in terms of he's got a big enough arm, I think he's accurate, he's got size, and I think the guys he played behind and watched every day, I think that's going to help him a lot. Jack Allison came from Miami, where they've really struggled at quarterback for a long time. I think just competing with those guys and learning from Baker Mayfield, learning from Kyler Murray, observing them, I think that's only going to help a guy get a lot better, especially if they keep battling and battling as he did.
The buzz phrase for new coaches is changing the culture. That's the thing and that can mean a lot. To you, what are the important things, couple things that a coach has to do, and how do they achieve that?
I think Neal's really good in terms of developing kids, but he's also really good at developing his staff, and he finds a lot of ways to do that. But I think what you want to do is, the first thing is you want to get guys to believe in what you're doing, because when you say you're changing the culture, you're changing the way they do things, you're changing the expectations. And I think it's not just the belief then, but then it's the commitment to it. It's one thing to go, okay, I get what this guy's talking about, then it's another thing to do all the attention to detail stuff. And I think that's not necessarily just football stuff, that's being better in the classroom. Just being around the country a little bit, in early spring I went over to Louisville, and they have a new coaching change, and it's a radical culture change there, going from Bobby Petrino to Scott Satterfield from Appalachian State. And I think you see that, what does it mean about changing the culture there? I think it's the attitude that people have, and it's the attention to detail. And it varies from wherever you are. I remember when visiting Brian Kelly when he took over from Charlie Weiss, and it was like walking in going, this locker room looks like a pigsty. It's like, this stuff matters. The little things matter. Pick that stuff up, clean it up, because if this is how you live, then this speaks volumes to you and how you do things. I had another coach who's now at LSU, Joe Brady, talk about something he got from Joe Moorhead, who went in and helped change the culture at Penn State, coming from Fordham. And he was like, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's all about that. And I think that's changing the culture.
You mentioned this in managing expectations. With 10 new assistant coaches, is it reasonable to expect all those guys are going to be successful? Or is that something that has to change, just like along with the players? There's going to be some that are going to drop by the wayside along the way.
Yeah, it's hard to hit about 1,000 on those. And some of those guys weren't with him at Troy, so I think that's a challenge. It's not just they're adjusting to different things too. For some of them, they're adjusting to each other. Staff chemistry, I think, is probably the most overlooked aspect of what happens when you have a coaching change. You look at Will Muschamp, he was a well thought of defensive coordinator as he was coming up. He gets a big job on a big stage at Florida, and he flops. And a big reason I think he flopped was his offensive staff. The offensive line coach didn't get along with the offensive coordinator. And if you get that kind of dysfunction, the kids sense it. It's just hard to, I think it's hard to get everything going if you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So look, Neal's a really sharp guy. I think he knows how the pieces need to fit. I would be surprised if he has a lot of that dysfunction, because I think he studies it. He studies what works, where guys have gotten off track. So I can't speak to all 10, but I would imagine he's thought really hard about how the pieces fit together.
This year, WVU has had a lot of guys go out. Not just the Will Greers and David Longs, but kids who have transferred after Brown took over. How much of an uphill battle on defense can a team face when it doesn't really have a ton of veterans in this league that has so many good quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think what you said, when you said in this league, there's a lot of offensive coordinators and a lot of quarterbacks who can really exploit a team if you get somebody out of position. And I think if you try to do too much, I thought Tony Gibson did a really good job there. And you said David Long, like, they had guys who could not just cover up mistakes, but I think they had a lot of guys who were really good at making a big negative play that sets somebody back. If you have guys who aren't really, just kind of feeling their way in their growing pains, and that's what I think you run the risk of this year, I think there's going to be a lot of times where you give up, 50, 60-yard back-breaking plays. And I think that's hard emotionally to kind of balance when you're, maybe can't trust it as well.
One more that's just kind of a broad question, Bruce. The transfer portal is something that's been a hot topic for a year or so, and hot topic today. What's your stance on it? Is it good for college football, and is it good for players?
I think it's good for players. I think it's kind of, I don't want to say overblown, but to some degree, a lot of times we see, because of Twitter and social media is more active now than it was, it's like this waiver wire. You see, so-and-so left NC State and he's in the portal. To most of us, we're like, we don't even know who that player is. There's a lot of times, I did a story on the portal for The Athletic where a lot of these kids were walk-ons. And, a school will have to do its own due diligence. is this kid even eligible? I mean, there are a lot of guys who fit into that category where they may not, you may not be able to get them on the field the next year. And I've talked to coaches who are like, I don't know why such and such, which is a Power 5 school, is interested in this kid. He was on our scout team the whole year. But, that expression, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And if it gives a kid another, a chance to go get a fresh start, I don't think that's a bad thing, because so much of the transfer system, I think, is a little bit archaic in the way it's set up.